Would
you know, I think that...
Would you have voted for Donald Trump if you lived in America?
Jesus, that's a hard question. You know, well, it's funny because up in Canada, I was invited out to a private club the night of the American election by a couple of Americans. And there was a bunch of Americans at this club. And they did a straw vote. And, you know, I thought that what I probably would have done when it came right down to it, because I had to vote, in this straw vote. So that was a pretty reasonable simulation. I think what I would have done was walk into the voting booth with the intention of voting for Clinton, and then at the last minute gone, to hell with it, I'm not doing it, and voted for Trump. I think that's what I would have done. And I thought about it a lot afterwards. I mean, for the entire election, virtually, I thought, well, Clinton has the experience necessary to at least keep the status quo in motion, you know? Right. So in some sense, she was a conservative choice because she'd been in politics for so long. So, but then as the campaign continued and she continued to beat the identity politics drum louder and louder, I became more and more concerned about her political direction, her ideological direction. And then I thought, when I was thinking about what happened in the United States, I thought, well, here's what the Americans decided. They decided that they liked the unscripted, impulsive lies better than the scripted, conniving, unscripted, impulsive lies of Trump better than the conniving, scripted lies of Clinton. You know, it wasn't like the two choices were so brilliant. So I think I would have impulsively voted for Trump at the last moment. I think so, but I can't be sure.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have been with the sense of delight, I can tell you that.
So it would have been based on, like, your sort of logically, rationally, you might have argued Hillary Clinton is the conservative pick because she's not going to upend the system. It's not going to be great, but we know what we're going to get with her. But deep down, viscerally, maybe you feel like, what would that visceral sort of sense have been for Trump?
Well, it's a repugnance. I really do find identity politics repugnant. And I don't use that term lightly. I think that we're making a very big mistake to re-tribalize our social conceptual structure. You know, the big advantage to being in the West was that we live in a society where the individual is sovereign. It's a miraculous achievement that we've managed that both conceptually and practically. And then to see the left is pushing this, I think the left is responsible for this in large part, the radical left, to redivide us among ethnic, sexual, racial lines, and then other lines without end, I think is a catastrophic error. And the Democrats just did far too much of that. And I wasn't happy at all that they abandoned the working class. You know, like I have a fair bit of sympathy, let's say, for the working class, coming from a somewhat working class background, having had a dozen or more working class jobs, and also some real appreciation for working class people. Like I like working with my hands. I've done a lot of renovation projects. I've worked with a lot of contractors and plumbers and carpenters and those sorts of people. And I felt that they had been abandoned by the Democrats and that was a real betrayal, a fundamental betrayal. So, and I know those, I'm not alone in those thoughts. That's for sure. I mean, the same thing's happening in Canada. The classic left wing in Canada has moved away from its proper concentration on the concerns of the working class poor, let's say, and started playing this intellectual identity politics game, which I think is, I really find it detestable.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I think there's absolutely no doubt that the left started this and that they're to blame for it. But I feel like Donald Trump, so where conservatism and American conservatism until recently said, identity politics is bad, therefore we're not going to play the game. We're not going to do it. And I believe that Donald Trump was a vote for, hey, we have to fight fire with fire. If they're going to play identity politics.
That's the big danger. Well, and that's one of the things that I've saved most of my online vitriol, let's say, for the radical left, because, and I think the primary reason for that is because of my academic background. It's the radical left has undue influence in academia, and then from academia into the broader world. You know, so it makes sense for me, especially given the compelled speech laws in Canada, to be primarily concerned with the overreach of the radical left. But it's not like I'm thrilled with the identitarian right, because they're doing the same thing. Their motive or their strategy is different, right? Because the radical left strategy is identify the majority group and defeat them with something like guilt. But the radical right strategy is, well, accept the majority virtue, let's say, and win the fight. But neither of those approaches are going to work. You know, like even the white supremacist approach, let's say, I mean, it's fatally flawed in a variety of ways, apart from its pure reprehensibility. It's like, well, who's white exactly? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you draw these distinctions? Which is the problem, of course, the intersection left has run into. They've run into the impossibility of making group identifications with any degree of accuracy. But the same problem, technically speaking, bedevils attempts on the right. Like, well, what are the people who inhabit northern India? Are they white? Like, where exactly are you drawing the boundaries here?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, it really matters, apart from it being just an appalling way of looking at things.
I have the sense that the problem is that what the left wants to do today is not to achieve parity. They don't want women or minorities to achieve parity and be equal. They want them to be superior. So in other words, they believe in a zero-sum game. They don't believe we can grow the pie and everybody be more prosperous. They believe that the zero-sum game problem is real. They have to winners and losers, and therefore they have to tear down, let's say, men, for example, in the Me Too moment in order to elevate women.
Yeah, well, the zero-sum problem is one that's bedeviled the left forever, you know, and their constant claim is, well, we live in a resource scarce environment, and yeah, there has to be winners and losers, which and I don't think there's any evidence for that at all. But even if they're not out to attain like an inversion so that the last become first, let's say, they're certainly not paying any attention to the fact that equality of outcome is an impossible goal. There's a measurement problem. So the measurement problem is, well, across what outcomes exactly? And I mean exactly, because these are very important issues. You want people to be equal across all possible outcomes? Like, where do you draw the borders? Well, that's a big problem. Like, and then the next problem is, well, who decides when they're equal? How do you set up a system that isn't the market system to decide when equality has been attained? So that's second insoluble problem. And then third insoluble problem is, well, across what groups? Because I don't know how many ethnic categories are used, say, in the U.S. Labor Board statistics and by the U.S. government, but it's in the dozens. Like, so you're going to equate across all ethnicities? Are you going to equate across all socioeconomic categories? You're going to include the infinite number of genders in that? Like, the problem that they're trying to solve cannot be solved. It's technically impossible to solve it, apart from the fact that it's also, when it's put into practice, it's actually murderous. The equity doctrine, I think, is a murderous doctrine. So, but it's not so easy to put your finger on why.
Right.